Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, and I am Hank Phillippi Ryan. Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET is crime time, no matter where you are. And I am so pleased today to bring you our fabulous interview with Adele Parks, you all, whose book, The Woman Last Seen, is launching today in the United States. It's a fabulous book. It has already hit the charts in the UK, number one in the UK, and I know it is on the way to number one here in the US. Woman Last Seen by Adele Parks. It is original, it is riveting, it is surprising, and sadly for us, it is indescribable. We cannot talk about it at all on this show. So Adele and I will have to talk about something else because there are so many spoilers in this book. I cannot wait for you to read it. Lisa Jewell, one of my favorite authors, as you well know, calls it chilling, gripping, and utterly unputdownable. And I so agree. Welcome, 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 Adele. Happy launch day to you. It's 9 o'clock where you are in London, right?
Yes, it is 9 p.m., which is why I have a dark window behind me. But time travel, well, I feel like we're in time travel now. It's quite exciting. Thank you.
It does feel like time travel. Today has already happened for you, which is sort of amazing.
Yes, it's quite nice though. I'm extending my launch day by having some extra hours with you guys, so that's brilliant.
Have you done anything fun or fabulous?
Today, today's been a lot about social media. I mean, that does tend to be what remote launch days are about, because I really want to reach out and talk to my readers, in the States. So most of it has been online rather than, I think if it was a UK launch, I might be tempted to sort of skip off for a nice lunch. But no, I've been hard grafting.
I mean, it's interesting because you are getting such a huge following in the United States, and it's so lucky in a kind of a weird pandemic-y kind of way that you can have such contact with your readers in the US, such personal contact. Do you enjoy that?
It really is lucky. I didn't feel lucky. Nothing about the pandemic feels lucky to any of us, does it? And in the beginning of 2020, I was due to come on my first ever United States tour. And I was so excited, I can't tell you. And that was planned for March. And of course, like many, many things, it had to be cancelled. And at that time, I'd written 20 books in 20 years, and they'd all been Times top 10 bestsellers. So my publishers were throwing a lot at me, a lot of excitement. So we were going to Australia, South Africa, Canada, obviously the US I've just talked about, and all but Australia got cancelled. We got to Australia before the lockdown, so that was lucky. But to your point, then we sort of said, well, we can't just give up on everything. We have some of these events. What else can we do? And that's when all the sort of, different platforms and Zoom, etc., all sort of started up, and it became possible to talk to fans in a really direct and open way. Because, I'm not talking to just one bookshop in one town now. I hope I'm talking to lots of people across your lovely country. So that is a bit of a bonus. They always say there's a silver lining out of really dreadful situations.
I agree with you. And this is exactly why A Mighty Blaze was formed at the beginning of the pandemic, as you know, by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, to sort of keep us together and keep us reading and keep us discovering new authors and keep us connecting with each other. And it's really been quite a joy to do Crime Time for A Mighty Blaze, including getting to talk with you about Woman Last Seen, which is, as I keep saying, and I'm going to gush you all, I'm going to gush for the entire time. And I'm going to tell you that as soon as we are finished today, you run right out to your favorite bookstore, online or in person. And trust me, get Woman Last Seen. You will not put it down. I have to tell you that the other night I was up till 2 a.m, and I finally thought, you have to put this book down, but I couldn't wait to find out what was happening. Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of people here today. You can go I hope you'll come to the comments when we're done, because people are just saying, hello, ladies, and love to see you, and all the hello, Hank and Adele, happy pub day, says Gail, and so many people are here to celebrate you and this marvelous book. Let me quickly, for you all, while I'm yammering, tell you a little bit about Adele, just her official bio, in case you have not met her. Adele Parks was born in Northeast England. Her first novel, Playing Away, was published in 2000. And since then, she's become one of the most beloved and biggest selling women's fiction writers in the UK, with 21 best selling novels in 21 years. And 4 million copies of her UK editions have been sold. 4 million copies and translated into more than 30 different languages. Here's a little bit more. She's been an ambassador for the Reading Agency and a judge for the Costa Book Awards and a keen supporter of the National Literary Trust. She's lived in Italy, Botswana, and London, and is now settled in Surrey with her husband, son, and cat. And if that fabulousness is not enough, Her Majesty the Queen gave Adele the honor of MBE for services to literature in the New Year's Honors List 2022. Did you just burst into tears at that?
It blew my mind. So first of all, I very nearly missed it completely because they sent an email sort of telling you have this honor and asking if you want to accept it. Of course, I did want to accept it, but I received that email while I was visiting my son in Russia. He was at the time studying in St. Petersburg. It was early December of last year, and I deleted it. I genuinely thought it was spam.
No.
And I got home and I got it sent to me again, and I just thought, oh, spam, because it does say, open this attachment. You had to fill out sort of some details about your name, full name, and that sort of thing. And I just thought, well, that's spam. And it was only when my agent got in touch with me and said, you have 5 hours, Adele. This was on the 10th of December, 2021. You have 5 hours because at 5 p.m. there's a cutoff point. The Queen's approved it. The Prime Minister's approved it. Your name's on this list. We're just waiting to hear from if you'll have it. I mean, the mortification of keeping the Queen waiting. I mean, in fact, I'm sure I didn't keep the Queen waiting. I'm sure there are processes to avoid that happening. But I obviously, as soon as I believed it, I was joyful and snapped the hand off, amazing. Because, I mean, I've only just discovered, but I think in the last 5 years on the Queen's New Year's Honours List, there's only been 5 MBEs in total over a 5-year period given to adult novel writers. So it's a very, very exclusive club to be in. And I'm blown away. It's amazing. And I will get to either meet the Queen, although with her health, I don't know, at her age, standing at a very long ceremony might not be the best thing. It might be Prince Charles or Prince William, but I'm not, let's face it, I'm not complaining about any which one. And I get a coat of arms.
So do you get to design it?
I know there are big bodies that have been operating for hundreds of years, and they keep the sort of the whole list of every coat of arms that's ever happened, and they work with you and get some idea of what you've, mine will probably have a book on, I'm assuming, because it is for services to literature, but then they will go off and design it, and I'm sure I will love it no matter what they design.
Oh my golly, that's a coat of arms. You were telling me that your boyfriend at the time wore a t-shirt at one point saying, my girlfriend has written a book and you should buy it. Now you can get t-shirts with your coat of arms.
Yeah, he's now my husband. I mean, he has been my husband for 17 years, but he was my boyfriend then. And so, yeah, maybe I should make him wear a t-shirt of it. I don't know. I'm certain there will be rules about what you can and can't do with a coat of arms. Because as you know, we Brits, we have a lot of traditions that are quite sort of long-standing. I think the other very glorious thing is it is giving me a platform. I mean, obviously the coat of arms is a lovely thing, but it's quite spoiling and just for me. But it is giving me a platform to talk about literature and the charities I work with and a much broader scale. So I think that's actually the most important thing, not whether I make my coat of arms into a t-shirt or a tea towel, although these things have been suggested to me by my gorgeous friends, and I'm sure that they're all having a bit of fun with it.
Well, it's sort of irresistible. And of course, it's important and marvelous and a tremendous honor. But I keep picturing the Queen in her study saying, has anyone heard from Adele? Has she called? So congratulations. And you'll see Gail and Sylvia and Sherry and Lynn when I look over here, you all, I'm looking at your comments, are saying congratulations. And Gail says, meeting Elizabeth, Charles, or William works for me. The whole
yes, quite.
I actually interviewed Prince Charles once, and this is such a digression, and he was pretty fascinating, I have to say. So
I think he's interesting. Yeah, I know. his wife Camilla works for the National Literacy Trust. She's the patron, and she's really interesting and very impassioned about writing and books. And people don't know that about her, and works really, really hard with schools that are perhaps the opportunities those children are given aren't as good as we'd like. And she works really hard with that charity and many, many others. They are fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations
Thank you.
again. I'm so glad you didn't always delete that spam.
I know. But there is a reason I deleted it. When I was writing Woman Last Seen, and it was in the middle of the very first lockdown, I got a terrible virus on my computer, and I was at 80,000 words, which Hank, it's like, that's the sweet spot. You've only really got the ending to go. And I lost every single file of everything I ever produced for 15 years. So and also photographs and everything of my son. It was devastating. And it was because I'd opened a file and I'd opened some spam and I'd got a virus. Well, my incredibly clever publishers, HarperCollins, I rang my editor and she said, we'll get IT on it. And they worked remotely with my husband for hours, absolutely hours. And the first thing we recovered, because they are publishers and they're not daft, was Woman Last Seen. One of the drafts, it wasn't actually my latest draft, but it was enough for me to be able to work on. And we slowly but surely have recovered, over a sort of period of 2 weeks, they recovered a lot of my files, but they recovered them without names or dates. They only had this sort of data code. So it's still one of my jobs. Every evening, I will open sort of 10 to 20 files and work out, are they a photograph? Are they a letter to my son's school saying he's ill and he can't come in? Or is it a novel? I mean, I literally don't know till I open.
I think this is a good plot idea. I think this is
also it's really good for for Woman Last Seen, because there is things go missing, and it's about two women that go missing. And then I had this entire book that went missing, and that feeling of helplessness that I had something that
you're such a look on the bright side by channeling that feeling. Speaking of which, we should be talking about Woman Last Seen, because as I said earlier, it is impossible to discuss, but I do want to talk about fidelity and marriage and truth and expectations, and friendship and missing people and COVID. But I will leave it to you, Adele, to carefully tread the tightrope of describing what Woman Last Seen is about.
Yes, you're not alone in that, because there is a huge, and I think quite original twist in it, that Hank and I are both trying to avoid telling you guys so we don't spoil it for you. So this is what I can tell you. Lee is a mom and management consultant. She's super busy and balancing her life, always spinning plates. She works half her week. She lives in London, but she spends half a week up in Scotland working for an energy company, and then dashes back and sort of has that whole guilt thing with her two stepsons that she's been the mum to for as long as they can remember. Their first mum died, and she's been the only mum they know. She's always spinning plates, looking out for them, and kind of feeling guilty that she's sometimes away from home, but is the breadwinner, so needs to do her job. One day, she just doesn't come home from her trip to Scotland, her work trip. And she's clockwork. She gets this sort of overnight sleeper train and walks in the door by 8:05, in time to take the children to school, and she's just not there. So the family are obviously devastated. It is the week before the very first lockdown. And so there's a lot going on in the country, but they do report the case. At the same time, there's a woman called Kai she only lives a few miles away from Lee, but in real terms, her life is so different. She is married to a very incredibly wealthy, slightly younger, very handsome banker who's Dutch, comes from old money, as we would call it. And I think you have the same expression, and lives in a penthouse. She has a kind of really glamorous life that I think many of us look at it and are quite envious of. But in fact, she goes missing the same week. These women on paper, you might think, how are they connected? Women, people go missing all the time, lots of them women. Why would we put them together? But the detective in charge of the case, Clemence, she is convinced there is a connection, and indeed she discovers there is one. I don't think that's a spoiler. It would be a very short book if there wasn't one. There is a connection. It's incredibly profound connection, and it's devastating for both families. So we're left with this feeling of, first of all, where have these women gone? Have they run away from something? Have they run towards something? Have they been taken? If they've been taken, who's taken them? We do know very early on, because it's the first chapter, that somebody is chained to a radiator.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you about, because you so cleverly handle this, because as you say at the beginning of the book, someone is chained to a radiator. She doesn't know how she got there or why or where she is at all. But as a result of that, the reader knows something that the characters in the book do not know.
Mm-hmm.
So they are talking about people, two wives being missing, and a police officer is on the trail. Clement is on the trail of finding these two wives. But when the idea is that someone is missing, the police detective Clement realizes that men and women are treated differently when it comes to being missing. And you have some wonderful information about how often that happens.
Yes. I mean, there's different things because, okay, so for women, they often are running away from something. Quite often domestic violence. So that's one of the things that police are investigating. These men, both the husbands, seem as though they're missing both their wives enormously and seem devastated, but Clemence isn't prepared to take that as read. But also, you know, these women, the Clemence, the detective, soon discovers these women are quite spiky and feisty. And so perhaps they were running towards something. But also, and I don't think any of us are naive enough, and this is one of the lines I use in the book, none of us are naive enough now to think if somebody's gone missing, it's going to turn out absolutely okay. I mean, in fact, 99% of people that go missing turn up within a week, which is a lovely statistic. Sorry, 98%. And another 1% turn up within a year. But that does leave 1% that just never turn up. They turn up dead. And so I think women particularly are vulnerable to that. Men do obviously go missing, and that is also a tragedy. I'm not sort of saying it is a bigger or smaller tragedy depending on gender. That absolutely isn't. I just happen to be focusing on women that go missing. But men go missing again because they sometimes it's because home responsibilities are overwhelming. So there's a lot to look into in missing cases. It isn't always somebody's tied up at a radiator, although in this case there is at least one person tied up on to a radiator.
But the thing that I thought was one of the many things I thought was so wonderful about Woman Last Seen, and let me remind you, did I forget to tell you that there was a giveaway? There is a giveaway. So one of you lucky commenters, someone who leaves a question or a comment for Adele, will be able to win a copy, a real book, not a proof like this, because I'm keeping this one, of Woman Last Seen. But one of the things that's so wonderful about it is that's the first thing that the male police officer decides. Oh, she's gone away. She's leaving her. One of them is too upset with being a mother and it's just too difficult for her.
Yeah.
The other one is gone for some other reason. They start making up reasons why women would go missing. And Detective Clements knows that that's not necessarily true. And she begins to see the world through her own sort of female vision of why someone would be gone. And I love the idea of how men and women, and you talk about this in the book, and it's so thought-provoking, how men and women are not only treated differently when something happens, but think of these crimes differently.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about the women going missing, I discovered in my research that there is this thing, and let's see how many of our readers kind of relate to it, but a lot of women in their marriages have secret escape funds, which sounds very dramatic, but basically little bits of money that they keep tucked away, that their partners and husbands don't know about. And that's not necessarily to escape from him in a hurry, but it might be to have a fleeting escape, like, I don't know, a new pair of shoes, you don't want to tell him how much it cost, or a trip to the spa, you don't want to tell him how much it costs. But they have a little secret, and it's to do with finances. And so I think that was part of the investigation as well for both of these women. Do they have escape funds? Is any of this to do with finances? Because there is that element when somebody disappears. They have to, if they've disappeared, they have to go somewhere, whether they've been taken somewhere and they wind up dead, or whether they've run off and they need a new rental. They have to appear somewhere. I think also in this book, one of the challenges and the kind of fine lines I was kind of walking is it was set the week before our very first lockdown, which I did on purpose to, I hadn't at first, I planned this whole book out before lockdown even happened. And I didn't know that lockdown was going to happen because none of us knew. But I got to a part in my plot where I thought, if I was one of these husbands and my wife had gone missing, or in my case, if my husband had gone missing, I would be banging on doors. I would be, why are they not banging on doors? Why are they not breaking doors down? Why are they not stopping people on the street? I would do that. And I needed a plot device to stop them doing that. And then lockdown happened. And I thought, oh, okay, so now they couldn't do it. Because if they were in a lockdown situation, any leads of where these women might be would go cold. And the detective is very aware of that. And also the other detectives around her, which are largely men, don't care. They're concerned that there's going to be rioting and looting. They're not sure that the British public are going to accept lockdown. Nobody knew that globally, how much we would follow the rules. And so they're training, and this was also a fact, they were training and putting all their resources into managing lockdown. So the idea of just a couple of women going missing wasn't big enough, it wasn't sexy enough, it wasn't interesting enough for a number of people on the force, and it is left to Clements to sort of sort it out on her own.
And it also adds the idea of this looming COVID, also adds to the creepiness of the drama and the suspense of maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe whoever has taken whoever they took is sick and will never come back. I mean, there are all kinds of.
And the loneliness, I think we all felt such an exasperated sense of loneliness. And, somebody is chained up and they're against their will. And I think, again, I absolutely channeled that feeling of, oh, you're kidding me. So my home is now basically my prison, which sounds awful because obviously it was full of the people I love most. And I'm very lucky that way. I had my husband and my son home. But I couldn't see my parents. I couldn't see my sister. I couldn't see my niece or nephew. So that sort of thing was something we're all related to. And I think in the book, that's something we feel. Although I do hasten to add to people, so you're not put off, it's not a book about COVID. It is the book about the inconvenience of the run up to COVID is part of the backdrop. But as I say,
the atmosphere of it, and it makes
it helped. Yes, I think oddly it helped, but it was plotted out and planned out pre-COVID when when there was a life pre-COVID.
I remember this. I do. The other thing that you handle so beautifully when it comes to missing people in a place like London is the technology. And you say in the book, Clements says it surprises and frustrates Clements that despite over 1 million CCTV cameras tracking movements, PIN numbers, databases, credit ratings, bank records, phone records, registration plate recognition, social media, tracking apps, emails, GPS, and even bloody nosy neighbors, people can slip away unnoticed. And that is chilling and fascinating.
It is. And it's, I think people quite often ask me, where did I get the idea from this book from? And I think we've all seen those really horrifying posters that might be pinned onto lampposts or in community centers saying, have you seen this man? Or have you seen this woman? And they don't usually say, have you seen this man? Have you seen this woman? They usually say, have you seen my dad? Or have you seen my mum? Have you seen my sister? Have you seen my daughter? So I always look at those posters, and actually I find them difficult to look at. For many years, I used to find them difficult to look at and think, I don't want to know. I don't want to know how tragic that that must be that that person has been so desperate in their own world that they've run away from it, or worse still, they were very happy and content in their own world and they were pulled away from it. But I think actually we owe the people that have gone missing, and also the families that are dealing with this ongoing tragedy and this lack of closure. We owe them something. And eventually I realized that what I could do is I could write a book about being in that perpetual no man's land of someone being missing. And maybe that would help people know that they're not entirely alone, and that it is a situation that is understood.
I mean, you have an especially heartbreaking scene that has to do with putting up missing posters, which was so touching and incredibly realistic, and comes out of another thing that you discuss so gorgeously in this book, sort of the feeling of what a family means and what being a father means and what being a mother means. And you're brave about it. You know, you're brave about talking about, I think one of the characters talks about being a mother is like dying the death of 1,000 cuts. And how she loves being a mom, and she also hates being a mom. And there's this difference between love and duty, and how complicated that is for women these days.
It really is. I think it probably always has been quite complicated, but I think probably years ago, the concern was, are my children eating? Have they enough food? Have they got shoes? And if so, I'm doing well as a mum. Nowadays, I think the expectation of being a mum or a parent is significantly higher, and it's incredibly complex. And I do look at families a lot. So my family is a very little family, but I was married and I had a baby son, and then my marriage broke up and I was a single mum for a while. And then I met my now husband, and he's brought up my son, and he's our son, and he's brought him up, you know, my son's 21 and my husband's been around in our lives for nearly 20 years. So he's been there for nearly all the time. But interestingly, throughout our lives, we have still had people say to my husband things like, oh, don't you want one of your own? Which is the most devastating, heartbreaking thing that can be said to him and to my son, because, you know, my son, that's his dad. And the fact that other people, strangers, or friends even, think that there is a distinction and that they can make the shout, I find really distressing. And to me, a family is the people who love you and who do the hours, put the hours in, teach you how to tie your shoelaces, teach you how to ride your bike, blow your nose 1,000 times, change your nappy, all those things. That's parenting, the day in, day out. And of course, people adopt, people have stepchildren, people foster. That's just touching the ice, you know, tip of the iceberg. There are lots of ways of being a family. And so I wanted to talk about a stepmom who gives her all. She absolutely adores these little boys. In her particular case, she couldn't have biological children. So falling in love with a man who already had very young children was a gift. And she brings these children up all their lives, and for many, many years. And yet, and this I think is a brave thing for me to write about in my particular circumstances, but I wanted to be honest. I always want to be honest. And yet she still knows there is a slither of a difference. And for all my life, I've been saying, there's no difference. My husband is my son's father, end of. He's definitely his dad, but he's not his blood father. And that is a slither of a difference. And so in this book, I look at that relationship, and it's a difficult thing to look at. So yes, I look at what it means to be a family. I also do look at the really honest bit about, it's not always easy, is it, ladies? We love them. We would spill blood for our children, but they're not always the most grateful human beings, are they? God love them. And it is tricky, you know, because it's meant to be that way. I remember telling my mom when I was a little girl, I was about 5 or 6, and she said, oh, I love you. And I said to her, I love you too. And I love you more than anyone in the world. And she said, well, you won't always, and you shouldn't. And it was such a funny thing to tell a little girl. And it sat in my head. But actually, she's absolutely right. I love my mom so much. But obviously, I went on to love my own child even more, because there's something about our biology that makes that be the case. but I shouldn't expect the same back from my child. I should expect if I've done a good job, he will go on to be a very loving parent himself. And that's how you hand it down. And so I wanted to look at all of that. But it's quite hard being the selfless one, right?
Well, it's interesting because those are different love relationships. So one doesn't blank out the other one.
Completely.
They're just, they exist in parallel. But when you focus on one, including the love of a friend, those can be very complicated relationships. You talk about this tightrope between love and hate, or admiration and envy, and how just a little bit over the line one way or the other makes so much difference. And you have a wonderful quote, if I can find it and read it to you all. And we are talking, you all, about Woman Last Seen by the fabulous Adele Parks, soon to be a #1 bestseller, I am sure. Christina is saying, I can't wait to sink my brain into this book, which is a marvelous way of putting it. And you can win this if you put a comment for a chance to win. You can put a comment for Adele, or a question, or just a general standing ovation for Adele. But you say about truth, and let me get my glasses so I can read this. People talk about the value of truth all the time, the importance of it. They pursue it as though it is the elixir of eternal youth, as important as life itself. It's not. It's just not. Often the truth is brutal, which is why most of us avoid telling it most of the time. I have regularly been more frightened by the truth than of a lie. So this idea of, you call truth, you say lies are convenient. It's easier to do. Talk a little bit about that balance of truth and lies, and how you talk about truth.
They are sometimes convenient. You know, the obvious convenient lie is, does my bum look big in this? As my best friend, or she's, you know, in the changing room. Even that's interesting. Okay, so if she's in the changing room and her bum does look big in this and she hasn't bought it, maybe that's the time for you to say, actually, you look great in the other one. But if this is my opinion, but if she's walking out the door for the biggest interview of her life and she has no time to get changed, you tell her, no, you look knockout. You look amazing. Because it would be the wrong moment to say to her, actually, yeah, you look enormous, and you're going to feel uncomfortable. And it's, you know, if that's her problem, that's what she worries about. So there's an example of a very simple lie that I think we might have all told at some point to make things happier and easier for each other. Then they get more complicated, don't they? Because some of us, I'm sure, have told people we love them when we don't, because we once loved them and they keep saying it to us. So it's sometimes easier to carry on and say it. Or sometimes we might still love them, but it's a different type of love, which I think happens in the book. It started to change, and rather than actually confront that and unpick the entire family network, it's easier to just pretend everything's the same as it always was. And so it's hard sometimes for people to live 100% honestly. Although, as I say, I think this is one of the joys of being an author, because you can pursue the truth in books. And as I say, I have always, all my life, said there is no difference between a step-parent and a parent. And, you know, in the real world, there shouldn't be. I wish there wasn't. But as I say, the real painful truth, and I actually would struggle to say this to my husband. So there's an example of, find this a really uncomfortable thing to say to him, so I would feel better lying. I think there is a slither, as I mentioned, a slither of difference. It might not matter, but the truth is that something that is kind to bring up all the time? No, it is much kinder to just say it's exactly the same. We're fine. So I think once you have, again, let's go to friendships, because I've talked about families a lot, but friendships are really key in the book. And one of the characters, Lee, her best friend is Fiona, and they've known each other so long that Fiona knows some things about Lee that Lee's own husband doesn't know. So that is interesting, because that means Lee is telling truths to her friend that she isn't telling to her partner. Now, I think most of us have been a little bit guilty of that now and again. How many times have some of us sort of downplayed, I don't know, the cost of something, Or if your friend is having an affair, if my friend was having an affair, I wouldn't tell my husband. I would think that was something between me and my friend to talk about. I wouldn't come home and think I should tell him about that, particularly if he knew the other one's partner, or it would put him in an awkward position. I don't know. Things are tricky. And I like to think I'm a really honest human being, and I try really hard, the way we all do, of being as honest as I possibly can. But I think there are certain things that are difficult to say out loud.
Well, I think you mine that so beautifully in Woman Last Seen, the things that we know and the things that we tell, and who we tell those things to, and how compartmentalized that can be, and how when someone does find out the truth, your entire existence and your entire relationship is changed by that one bit of knowledge, and how the dominoes can just crash to the ground as a result of that. I do want to say, I want to ask you, this is so gorgeously and seamlessly put together. There's just this thrum of suspense throughout. You cannot stop turning the pages. How much did you plan that? And how much did you know what was going to happen, not only in the end, but throughout?
I am a planner.
Mm.
So I spend about 3 months plotting. It starts quite simply with a spidergram with my main characters in the center of the page, and then there'll be little lines coming off and sort of the connections. And the little lines might sort of say, Lee married to Mark, and then I'll circle Mark and think, what do I know about Mark? And have a few sort of spidergrams coming off him. And I sort of build a page that might be plot, it might be character. It's just my initial ideas. Then I will transfer those initial ideas into a sort of line by line, chapter by chapter, more or less. This is what I think is going to happen, and these are the beats and these are the scenes. That does change sometimes when I'm actually writing. I think, oh no, I've rushed that. That wouldn't happen yet. Or, oh no, that seems ages off and it needs to come forward, because I feel a sense of pace. But even before, even when I've got both of those things to do with my plot, the other piece of planning I do is characters. So I have a little trick that I'd love to share with any of our readers, and many of our readers, I'm sure, are writing their own works and might be quite interested in playing with this idea themselves, which is I interview my characters. So I have now a whole, I don't know, I was to about 100 questions. I don't ask all my characters 100 questions, but I might ask my 5 or 6 main characters up to 20 questions. And obviously some of the questions are the really basic ones, like name, age, gender, do they have kids, do they have a job, and what is it? So that's kind of basic, but that's not a person. That's not a person. What makes a person, what makes a character in my mind, asking them questions like, okay, when was your first kiss? How did you feel about it? Okay, what's the moment you're most proud of in your life? What's the moment you're most ashamed of in your life? Who's your favorite sibling? Because that's a lie that you should always tell. You should not have favorite siblings. You should not have favorite children. You should not have favorite siblings.
You must ask what their relationship with their parents is.
Yep, that's one. And I throw all of these in. And as I say, I don't ask all of them all the time. I might ask, okay, is there one thing in the world that nobody knows about you? Is there one thing in the world only one person knows about you? And if so, who is that person? And I don't sort of sit there with a chair, although I think that would be quite fun. Sit opposite an empty chair. I actually write down my answers very quickly. And then I find that really helps when I'm
Adele, let me ask you about how your brain does that, because I can picture this. You write, what's your favorite kind of ice cream, or what would tempt you to run away, or do you honestly love your husband, that kind of thing. But then you are answering the question. Do you feel your character speaking through you?
Yes.
Are you answering it?
Yes, because that's so clever, Hank, because, well, obviously, because you're a writer too. Yes, by then, when they're answering me, I do very much feel it's them answering me, which makes me sound slightly crazy. I suppose all creative people are ever so slightly crazy, and that's fine. So I can also hear them sort of give me a rebuff and tell me a lie. And I'll say, I know you're lying. So you could have one character saying, well, of course, darling, of course. And then I'll say, I know you're lying. That's just what you'd say to everybody. What are you really thinking? And then I dig through it. So it's a real unearthing. It's a real process of digging down quite deeply. And and it makes it very comfortable when I actually do start writing, when I finally start writing. People sometimes talk about writer's block and how you manage that. And if I come to a bit that I feels a bit more of a struggle and I think it could potentially turn into a block, I would always then go back to these notes, which I find have always taken me through the sticky patches.
That's so
yes,
wise.
it's
I mean,
there.
when that happens to me, and I know that feeling when you're getting there, but you can feel that you're going to seize up in a second and not.
Do you frankly think it's that it's like running in your car and you see that the petrol gauge is going down and you're there thinking, will I get to the garage in time to fill up? And you start to panic. And I think that's what writer's block is. You think, I've only got so many ideas that's taking me to maybe chapter 7, and I know I have to get to chapter 10. So by having these characters in the background, or my spidergram, or my plan of chapter by chapter, that is like me refilling and recharging, and it takes me on to the rest of the journey.
I love that. I mean, I might try the spidergram. And I can see how the puzzle pieces, how the world would start to blossom in your head, that it's not the spidergram anymore, but that you're really cultivating who the people really are. I mean, I ask myself in those sort of moments, I say, what does she want and how far will she go to get it? And why is she doing this? Why would she do this? And why do we care? And once it becomes about motivation and how they see the world, that sometimes, knock on wood, gets me a little bit farther. So then do you just write, not just, but do you write in order then?
I do. I write in order and I edit as I go along. So in the morning, I write between 1,000 to 2,000 words a day. I try and do most of my writing in the morning. Now I'm more or less, I'm only Monday to Friday, although sometimes if it's a quiet weekend, I might do the weekend too. Which isn't a problem to me. I mean, I love writing. It's the actual writing is the best part of the job, and I love that. So, but I do stop at 2,000. I never go past 2,000, even when I think I'm on a flow, because experience has shown me, and I have been doing this a long time, that if I do, the next day I'm a bit burnt out. And it's quite nice sort of stopping, thinking, I really want to finish this chapter. And like, no, you've done enough. And actually coming back mid-chapter is quite helpful. You feel a little sort of more full and more
the momentum
up. Yeah. Whereas I've experimented with all sorts of ways of writing over the years. And one of them I used to think, I have to write a chapter every day, which is really, really limiting and a big ask. And then other times I used to think, I have to do 5 hours every day. And sometimes I would find 5 hours produced me 500 words, and sometimes 5 hours would produce me 2,000 words. Mm-hmm. So that's not necessarily the answer either. I mean, the truth is you just have to find your own rhythm. But for me, I write nearly 99% in chronological order. I edit as I go along. I might write one day, edit it the next day, and then keep writing. I expect there to be very, very little work by the time I give it to my editor, and she expects that too. So keep that up, because I'm quite ruthless with myself. I think that's something that comes with experience and age, that I do think, it's not the end of the world if I cut this. I still, even now though, if I cut something, I put it in a file called bits. I mean, that's such an interesting.
I completely agree with you. It's one of the, it used to be, my precious words. And now I think, no, if it is stalling the pacing, it goes. I'm happy to have it go. Because I love cutting to see what the book really is. That crystalline version of the tightest book that there could possibly be is really a joy. And I'm very proud of myself when I cut the things that aren't going to be there in the end anyway, when I cut them.
Yes, it's like being a good surgeon, I suppose. You know what needs to come out, and to make things better. But it as you say at the beginning, I mean, my first novel, I remember redrafting from the start over and over again. And that's, it's exhausting and confusing and normal. So if anyone else is doing that, it's fine.
You learned how to do it is what happened. After 20 some novels, you learned how to do it. And my final question, and then we'll take one or two from the audience, because now I have talked to you too long, but you are irresistible. You are fabulous. Your book is amazing. Woman Last Seen is not to be missed. Let me just ask you a quick final question for me, and that is, you always wanted to be a writer. I read somewhere. What do you think about how your life has turned out so gorgeously?
Wow. I mean, I have no idea. So when I was a little girl, I was about 5. I spent a lot of time I always have spent a lot of time in libraries, but my sister, I was only in little infant class and my sister was in junior class. So I had to wait for her at the library with my mum. And we waited there every day, and between sort of 5 and 7-year-old until I got into the juniors, that was the case. And the librarian one time when I was about 7 by this point said to me, Adele, you visit the library more often than anybody else I know. And do you think one day you want to be an author? And I didn't know what the word meant.
Oh.
And then she sort of explained, writer, and she rushed off and got an Enid Blyton book and said to me, Enid sits at home and she writes these stories for you. And for a while, I was under the impression that Enid was literally writing these stories for me. But I think what she allowed there is she gave me, for the first time, to understand that the pages in this book had been created in somebody's head. It was an actual job. And so from then on, I used to say, I'm going to be a writer. But I didn't know how to go about it, as most of us don't really. So it took till I was 30 until I got my first book deal. And I've been writing every year since. And it's a joy. I feel so lucky. I mean, it's like any life. There are things I didn't anticipate. I hadn't quite anticipated how, if you do it for 20 odd years, you really have to be quite structured and disciplined and making sure you have a social life, because it's not very social. It's very, very insular. And that's why doing something like this and when it's promo time is so exciting, because I actually talk to real people and, my readers and some interaction. And that's why I love my social media so much, because, you can reach out. But on the whole, day in, day out, I'm on my own a lot. And that is a slight drawback. But every other aspect I love. I get paid to make stuff up, to think about things, to investigate my deepest thoughts, other people's deepest thoughts. I get to transport myself to different places in the world, different times. I've written historical novels in the past. And it's a real joy. And then things like getting the number ones and getting published abroad, I still can't quite comprehend that. It still seems strange. People say to you, what does it feel like to be, I remember the first time I did hit the number 1 spots, I did cry. I did cry. And the MBE, I mean, that's blown my mind. I think it's actually quite funny. I come from the northeast of England, from a very loving but ordinary family that are massively keeping my feet on the floor, despite me always wanting to sort of soar off and be imaginative. They've always sort of kept my feet on the floor. And I think that's been a really great thing, because this job is about you're only as good as your last burger. You really are only as good as your last book. People invest their time, which is a huge compliment. They invest their time reading your books, and you have to deliver. And each one of them, I just hope I have. I hope it's a tasty burger, says the vegetarian.
No, this is a delicious burger. This is one of my favorite burgers of the year. And I know it will be the same for all of you who are listening today. You have hit it out of the ballpark with this book, Adele. It is absolutely riveting. Let's take a question or two if you have a moment. I know it's 10 o'clock coming up on 10.
I'm absolutely fine. If you guys are still going, I'm perfectly happy.
You can keep going. Shannon Hansen, the fabulous Shannon Hansen, asks, who was the hardest character to write? That's a toughie for this book.
Fiona's quite a difficult character to write, because Fiona is the friend. So she is, by definition, a supporting actress. And yet I don't want her to be throwaway or not vital in her own right. She needed to be compelling and interesting. And I needed to give her a story so that we understood her friendship with Lee, and she wasn't just a Lee backup. So I think the lesser characters are sometimes, the sort of if you counted the number of lines, she has less lines. And I think, if not that you do that because that'd be weird, but if you were in film, that's what they would do. And yet she needs to be compelling because she is. There is a reason for support. Yeah.
Exactly. And she's not just a sidekick character.
No, and we
To
don't want to be.
allow, and often sidekick characters are to allow the main characters to have someone to talk to, or to be the funny one, or to be the crazy one, whatever they turn out to be. But you have created a wonderful character in Fiona, someone with motivations of her own. So that's, and a background of her own. That's
Yes.
fascinating. Who else has a question? How did you transition, says Gail, from historical, hi Gail, from historical novels to thrillers and mysteries?
Well, I must drive my publishers mad, Gail, because I started with what I think would be categorized as romantic comedy, sort of satirical comedy at that. I would have, relationship dramas, but with feisty, as I mentioned, feisty heroines right from get-go. So people that, women particularly, that don't really accept the norms. And I know even back then people said, oh, it's a bit uncomfortable for a romantic fiction because you don't always deliver the straightforward happy ending. And so I wasn't quite comfortable in that genre. Then I moved into relationship dramas, and the difference between that and a romantic comedy would be, it wouldn't necessarily be a romantic relationship. It might be a relationship between your parents or your siblings or your friends. And I realized that was more compelling for me. And then on book, I think 14 or 15, so sort of quite a long time into my career, I just said to my publisher, I have these 2 stories about World War I that I really want to write. One is about the spare women, spare brides that were left after World War I, when in Britain alone, we were 1 million men of marrying age, fewer than women of marrying age. And these women had no prospects because they'd been brought up to imagine marrying. So then that was their sort of career opportunity, and their financial opportunities all gone in one fell swoop with the war. So I wanted to write a story about those women and how they survived in the 20s and indeed thrived, silver lining story. And then I also wanted to write about conscientious objector. So I wrote this other book called If You Go Away. But by the time I'd finished 2 historical novels written in a war that profoundly affected our world, I think it just changed our world. I mean, it arguably created Hitler, which were led on to World War II, and all the other gross things that have happened with warfare started with World War I. So then it seemed impossible for me to go back to something light or at all light. And I think I just felt thriller gave me the opportunity to combine all those genres. I could talk about relationships. I could talk about the sort of family and friends, and loving and not so loving relationships, but also with a huge level of drama. And I think also because I was getting older, my last 7 or 8 have been thrillers. I guess my life view had changed. So when I started writing, I used to concern myself a lot with choices. What was ahead of me? What are my choices? What are my characters' choices? What are the people around me choosing? Because that's what it's like in your 30s. By the time you hit your 50s, I think anybody with a wise head is looking at the consequences of their choices. And often we're very, very comfortable with our choices, and that's great. And sometimes we're not, and that leads to thrillers. So I think it was a combination of finding the right genre for me at the right life stage. I think each genre has been correct for me at the particular life stage.
And this has worked absolutely perfectly. Let's see who the winner of Woman Last Seen is. We will send a copy of this book, and that is to Dorian Cerrone, or Dorian Cerrone. Congratulations. Please send it.
Congratulations.
And this is your lucky day, Dorian, I have to say. This book is chilling and suspenseful and surprising and unique and original, and I absolutely love it. And Adele, you are such a rock star. Congratulations on another.
Well, Hank, you are the rock star. Thank you so much for inviting me onto Crime Time. I love speaking with my American readers. It's a huge opportunity. So honestly, it's you being the rock star, and thank you for your time.
Oh, our complete pleasure. Our complete pleasure. Stay here for 1 minute, you all, because I want to show you double booked. We're double booked, and crime time is the only time that's a good time to be double booked. Next week, we have 2 interviews for you. At 3 p.m. ET, Kara Ruda with Somebody's Home, which is just as creepy as it gets. So I cannot wait for you to hear about it. And then at 4 o'clock, a debut novel by Eva Jurczyk, the Department of Rare Books and Special Collections. And you can see from the cover and the title how unusual and unique and complicatedly wonderful this book is. So do join us next Tuesday at 3 and 4 for 2 more fabulous novels. But now, and Christina is saying thank you for a lovely hour. I had a lovely hour too, Christina.
Thank you.
And we are all pointed right now to Woman Last Seen by Adele Parks. Adele, I will give you the last word.
Well, I want to just say thank you. Do stay in touch. Find me on my socials, and yeah, I hope you really enjoy it. And I'm very grateful for you giving up your time and coming to listen to me.
I promise you will love this book. Safe travels, happy book. Congratulations on another wonderful launch day. We can't wait to have you back for your next book. And you all, we will see you next Tuesday at 3 and 4 p.m. for Crime Time. Until then, stay safe.